we completed the study, and then there was one area which was actually outside of our study area that turned out to be the most interesting, and that was the estuary. The study area was confined to freshwater because that was the kind of instrumentation we had. We weren't ready to do anything in saltwater. And yet I put a couple of recording thermometers down in the estuary just to see what was happening, just see what the fish were looking at when they came in. When I yanked those things and ran off the data on a computer, I was floored. It was like over 75 degrees Fahrenheit in the bottom of the estuary. What is going on there? So we got a dissolved oxygen meter, and we took our recording thermometer down and we started floating the estuary. And when we would drop, the recording thermometer would be like quite cool up on top. And start to go down and down, or start to go up and up and up and up and up and up and up. And then when it hit the bottom, we were reading well into the 70s. We had an inverted thermocline that the last waves, the last high tides of spring would get in under the bridge, get locked into the estuary, remain there, and because they're heavier than the fresh water that was going over them, they would remain there picking up solar energy throughout the summer, get tremendously hot, tremendously dense, and lose all of their oxygen. So when we started dragging the oxygen meter on the bottom of the estuary, it was a wasteland. We found no oxygen anywhere on the bottom, and we realized the whole benthic community, all of the crawdads, everything that lived on the bottom of the estuary was dead. And it didn't sound good. So we did this a couple of years and verified that this was a really odd situation. And we talked to the Mid-Coast Watersheds Council about it, who then called together a meeting. And EPA decided they were interested. So they came down and they set 3 recording instruments into the estuary and left them there for a year. And then last year, Cheryl Brown, the scientist at EPA, who was the project manager, delivered a very short paper on it. It was startling. The estuary is anoxic. It contains no oxygen down at the bottom. And it is so anoxic that it produces ammonia, which means that it's toxic. And that solved a question for us, because about 5 years ago, the salmon were hanging out in the ocean, and they were in the pools at the entry to the river. They wouldn't come in. And I thought, how do they know there's no oxygen there? Because by the time it gets out under the bridge, it gets oxygenated. That that ODFW had to shut down the fishing season out in the delta because people were snagging these things. They were dying in ponds and people were throwing them out. And it was pretty awful. But these fish would not enter the estuary. And this was the answer. I mean, it wasn't like the water coming out was getting oxygenated, but they were sniffing that ammonia. And they wouldn't come in until it cleared. One of the other interesting things about that EPA study was that as small a rainfall as 0.13 of an inch would flush the estuary clean. That everything was perfectly fresh for like 3 days after the smallest little freshet. The same thing would happen if a tide got in over that dike. It would get under the tongues that were hanging down the bottom, bring them up, and rush them back out. So, inadvertently, we now had our answer to what happens if you take too much water out of the river. That the one point that the EPA made was the health of the estuary is entirely dependent upon the amount of incoming water coming in from upstream. that was our smoking gun. I hadn't been looking for it. I had purposefully designed this whole study so as not to find what we had just found. And there it was. That essentially means the city is going to have to find another source of water than the Yachats River. Because if they ever want to satisfy an EA, or even, I mean, they built a bunch of protections for the estuary into their land use plan last year. They would have to get those out of there in order to take water out of the river, because you cannot take an action which is in conflict with your land use plan. They would be doing something which would be harming the estuary. So I have talked to the city, piecemeal, about Plan B. I know that I'm identified as a person who really wants to keep them out of the river, but really I'm just being helpful here. And I would like to see the city seriously start to look at developing water storage, to store more winter water, and maybe get a reservoir somewhere, or find a way, pay for storage in town, to handle these fluctuations that the city experiences July 4th and Labor Day and these times in which they need more water. So we're still working at it. It is still in play. But now there is enough information that I think the end game is in sight here, that we have done what we started out to do, even inadvertently. And we also, in the meantime, have this huge body of data which we didn't have 10 years ago, which we can give to future scientists who we hope are going to come and work in the estuary. Yes?
Will Nora be involved in this?
Who?
The North Atlantic, the
NOAA.
Noah. Will Nora.
Yes, well, NOAA Fisheries is responsible for everything that happens in endangered species habitat.
Yeah.
So yes,
They will be.
not that NOAA. The NOAA that's coming into Newport is oceanic. They do mostly stuff, out in the open ocean. The NOAA that we are looking at is NOAA Fisheries, which the responsibility used to be with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and they, yes, of course, they're part of the whole permit process. Mm-hmm.
Did I understand you to say that they added water from the estuary to water that would presumably have been, some of them at least, for drinking, and that passed undetected by people in Yachats?
They never took it into the plant.
Where did it go?
Into the pump. Actually, maybe they didn't. The pump is still there. I mean, if you go past the water treatment plant, there is this little green house sitting right next to the fence. That was the pump that was going to take the water out of the estuary, pump it into the plant, and magically perfect the right.
Oh, so it didn't happen?
It didn't happen because they did not get their water conservation management plan approved, because we were beating it up every time it came out.
Okay,
but because Water Resources was ready to accept the plan, the second they'd accept the plan, flick the switch, pump it into the system, or just pump it into the, not even drink it, and poof, they're done. They have perfected their right. We're powerless.
How far above the bridge does the estuary extend?
The influence of tide water, how far it backs up, is right below Carson's pasture, which is the first big opening at about the 2-mile mark. That's head of tidal influence. Salt water goes up to just below Briggs's, where the greenhouse was, probably 200 meters above the boat landing.
You mentioned that you were doing some water quality
I was talking about the national standards for total maximum daily loads were actually intended for real pollutants. Our pollutant here is sunshine. This is because, this year we're fine. Our water quality limitation is the heat of the water. Because we are an anadromous system, our ideal and actually maximum temperature should be 64 Fahrenheit. In many places we exceed that, and the reason that we do is the absence of shade on the banks.